Hey everybody, this is Kathy Lloyd from Whimsy at Work, and I am an independent consultant, and I also work as a coach with a group called Course Careers, and they have a data analytics program which helps people get training they need to be entry-level data analysts, and they do it all at a very accessible price. So I'm proud to be part of that organization. And I will say that one of the things that happens in that world is they purposely give you bad data. And so everybody in the student group knows the pain of dealing with blank values, having to transform dates, sometimes weird anomalies where it looks like somebody started to type some number, and it didn't. And so I thought it would be useful for folks to understand how data can be better, and how important data governance program is for making analysis efficient and effective. So, um, what else do I do when I'm not coaching, y'all? My company is based on 35 years of higher education experience and in analytics, in budgeting and financial modeling, across public and private institutions. I was also a director with Huron, a large consulting firm, for about 4 years, and learned all sorts of cool stuff about doing data assessments. I led a data strategy, and it was the same data strategy that I worked on as the chief data officer at UW-Madison. I also do keynote speeches and a lot of data governance coaching. And what do I mean by data governance coaching? I actually just talk people through and enable them to create their own roadmaps, um, and change management plans and all the kinds of things that one needs to do to set up a data governance program, which can be a challenge in the industry of higher education because people, um, when they hire someone, they just hire someone, and it can be really challenging to develop an enterprise-wide program with just one person. So I'm the support structure for that. Um, and I actually have a website, whimsyatwork.com, where you can read all about it. You can learn about the wonderful executive coaching program I went to, and hopefully engage. Would love to hear your feedback. All right. So today I want to talk fairly briefly, it's just about 45 minutes or so, about what data governance is. Um, why do we have it? Why is it, I think we know why we need it because we have bad data. And so how do we implement it? Data governance components, what is it comprised of? Um, the roles in data governance, the people who make decisions and help to disseminate knowledge about data, and then some rules that an organization will create to make sure everybody's on the same page about how we are going about protecting our data and making sure it's viable and strong, which is what we want so that we can do some AI or other kinds of activities. And then the last thing I'll do is just talk to you about where to go for more information. It could be just a couple of folks or organizations that I use when I'm coaching and that I've learned from over the years. So let's talk about what data governance is. First of all, it's a program. It is something that's ongoing. It's not a project that you take on for a little while and go. It's like, a maintenance program for your building. You can't not take care of it. Otherwise it starts to go rogue and, not meet the purposes that it was meant for. So data governance is, first of all, a team sport. It involves people from all over the organization down to the individual, even if it's just awareness of their personal responsibility to interpret and protect the data. It hits everybody. It not only focuses on who has the rights to give access to high-risk protected data, which is typically how it starts. People are, interested in protecting their private information. But it also governs how data are constructed, how they're shared, how we define them and make the descriptions of what they are very crystal clear, so everybody knows what they're doing when they create a query with it. Surprisingly, a lot of times chief data officers will end up in the IT organization, but it is a business related program, not just technology. The technology serves as the holding place for data and the transfer of data, but data literacy and accessibility to data and knowing how to classify data lives in the business with business people. So why data governance? Well, I always use the analogy of a building and building maintenance. Our data is as important an asset as the buildings that we occupy in doing our work. And so we need to get beyond what has sometimes been a very focused analysis of finance data from our finance system and HR data, HR system, and expand that to include all sorts of other sources of data, and to deliver value to the business through it. For that data to be meaningful and to drive value, it needs to be consumable by everybody in the organization, not just data experts or leadership or managers, that kind of thing. Today, more businesses want to put high quality data into the hands of people who need it to do their jobs. They want a workforce that can use data to drive strategic decisions and operational insights that help them control costs or grow revenue. And data governance covers all of that. So the organizations have to build these processes that define who owns what data, who's responsible for its integrity and cleaning it up when it gets, out of sorts, and how it can be used for decision making. And they need to enable data citizens to find, trust, and access data to generate insights and deliver value to their business more than they have in the past. It's becoming more important with the prevalence of cloud applications that store our data up in the cloud. And we have to come back in and reconnect it so that we can make interesting queries that consider different domains of data, HR, CRM, the financials. And it is at the foundation of AI and machine learning. In order to have really good results from our AI and our machine learning models, we really need to have strong data that is trusted. Because if you're basing your algorithms on bad data, you won't get good results and you might actually harm people. So these are the components of data governance. And as you go around the wheel, which is the DAMA wheel, the Data Management Association wheel of data governance, these are all the areas that data governance touches. And it's because data are everywhere and we are trying to manage the integrity of it in many, many source systems, in local systems across our organization, and we need to make sure that all of these things are touched by data governance, our data governance program. So data storage and operations typically sits in the IT organization. It's like, where are we storing the data? How many copies of it do we have? And, do we have the lowest cost, most effective storage for it that allows the majority of access? And so that's a big piece of this, especially as we proliferate applications across an organization. Where did the data go? And is it secured in its Microsoft Access database or Excel file, etc.? So we need to think about that a lot. Data security is typically where people think data governance belongs, because the practice of identifying data sets and classifying them according to the security classification, whether they're highly restricted, or even public data, um, is the work of the business. And it unfortunately typically ends up on the other end with the IT folks who have to run audits and then track down people and find out what's going on there. So like having that part of your data governance strategy makes life a lot easier for those folks. The other thing is really about the lifeblood of our data flowing through the organism that is our organization. And is it flowing in a streamlined way? How efficient are we? How many integrations that are of the same type do we have, or do we move them together? And so then there's maybe 1, 2, 3 slices of an integration that people can reuse and reuse versus everybody having to start from scratch every time. And so the other piece of this is really interoperability, which has to do with making sure that the data is of high quality in every system that it is integrated into. And that if it's integrating from one system to another, that it's flowing according to the business rules and being integrated into the correct columns in the database. Document and content management. This is really important, and it's often left behind. A lot of times, people just don't want to write down their data definitions. They don't want to go through the hassle of collaborating with others on what the right data definition is, or where do we train people in how to read a report that we've created with certain data. What is the meaning of it? And so this is a big part of data governance, and it's a big part of the development of web solutions and integrations, etc. Like, what is it? Where did it come from? And how is everything linked together? Helps us understand and better protect our assets. The next piece is really reference and master data. And what do we mean when we say master data? Well, it's sort of interesting because you have a little master data set on your own phone, which is, I have a list of contacts in my phone, and as people change, and maybe I created one in my my Google contacts, and there's my phone contacts, etc. And they all come together, and I'd really rather not have duplicates or ancient email addresses that the person hasn't had for 20 years, that kind of thing. And so it's really about processes that operate on behalf of the entire organization that create master data, which can be used to feed all sorts of purposes. Maybe it's an analytical use case, maybe it's an integration use case, um, and constantly cleaning and making sure those data sets are free of hallucinations and have singular, record truth of the record of truth, is makes everything go a lot easier across the entire organization. So this is another typical way that data governance tends to be associated with the technical folks who are doing the data warehousing and the business intelligence. And what it is really making sure that we have documented data definitions for all of the things that we have transformed to make it easier for a business person to interpret and understand. And so, part of that documentation is, where are the reports that I would like to see? What ones exist so that I don't have to do it myself, that kind of thing. And so understanding what's in the warehouse and what it's used for is critical. The next piece is really metadata. So it's like, what do we know about this data, especially if it's come from a table in a particular database? Is it documented? Can we, for example, explain what data type it is. Is it a date? Is it, is there a specific unit that the data is captured in the system? And so we want to make sure we understand that so that we can make our integrations correct, that we can not make assumptions about the width of a field or the content of a field. It just makes querying a whole lot easier when you know. Data quality is a very large part of data governance, and there's all sorts of processes that we use to make sure that the data is of high quality. One of them actually is at the data entry level. Is there a boundary on the type of data that a data entry person can load into a field? And do we want a pick list of values that makes sure that they don't, kind of fat finger something, and we don't have many multiple instances of something that is effectively the same thing? We end up cleaning up a ton of that. And so, keeping track of data issues and transparently showing folks what's going on in terms of the quality of the data is really important, especially if you're going to try and do some AI, algorithms, et cetera, on it. If it's poor data, you're going to get pretty much poor results. All right, so next up, data architecture. And I just love data architecture. It's sort of like the blueprint for how you have constructed the data so that it can be retrieved quickly and that it's understood and tracked. So, really, it's the same as a building, right? Managing it, the right storage and management, and the way that it can be transformed for purpose in the organization is incredibly important. And the way that the data architecture is constructed typically means that in some cases we don't have to build sort of a structured data model around something if it's just going to be used by sort of back-end analysts, if it's going to be used for reports, if it's going to need to be historical, etc. Like, where, how do we set all this stuff up for success? I mean, you wouldn't build a building without a blueprint and discussions about what goes in what room and how it's supposed to look. And data architecture is exactly the same way. So data modeling and design is designed to make things that may have been in the transactional system in a not so ideal structure for querying. And it's a process of sort of bringing data from its raw source and maybe sometimes cleaning it up, maybe changing some of the definitions of things, maybe changing the column names so that they're easier for business users to understand when they're writing queries. That part is really important, as is making sure that the data modeling and the design is reusable and not very narrow in its purpose. So, you don't want a bunch of queries that create a structure in the warehouse that then you can't actually drill anything to it, etc. So that is also a piece of the data governance process. So what are the roles that one typically finds in a data governance situation? And these are frequently conflated, and people use names for themselves, which is not quite correct. But I think one of the things that you do in your primary data policy is that you start to set out, these are the named roles, and they have absolutely nothing to do with the job title, but it is about responsibility and accountability and ownership. So the first piece is a data trustee, and this is somebody who is not the CEO of a corporation or the president. It's really somebody who has a particular like content area. We call them domains, that generate and exploit a lot of the data. So you might have your director of marketing or VP of marketing might be a data trustee, and they're at a very high level, and typically they uh, execute and evaluate policy. They don't get as involved in the day-to-day operations with data, but they are, they need to talk about it and they need to ultimately be responsible for it in their business area. So, you could have a data steward, a data trustee could have many data stewards that represent different pockets of the data. So in finance data, you might have a steward for receivables, a steward for payables, that kind of thing. And their job is to really kind of set standards and, enforce the rules that are created by data policy. And, ultimately, they are the ones that need to correct uh, data errors, working perhaps with a team of people to identify what the source of the error is, um, and enforce the business rules upstream of when it ends up in a report downstream. The other thing they do is when, if you've classified your data into different levels, they typically have to be consulted every time somebody needs access to a highly restricted data source. And they evaluate the use case and then they come back and say, I would rather do it this way. Um, and talk the analyst through uh, what can be done, uh, barring, if they're not able to get access. And then the last one is a data custodian, and this is typically somebody who's like right there working on the system. They understand a source system really well. They understand how the data comes in. It could be a technical person or a funky technical person, functional like me. And their job is to actually run rules that in the data in the source system that make sure that the data are complete and that there are no blank fields in something that we really, really need to not be blank. They also lead data cleanup projects. So they will run queries in the source system, identify areas where there's bad data, and then, work with the business team to get it corrected. So next up is data governance rules. So the people we talked about in the last slide create these kinds of levels of rules. So policy is the high level one. It really talks about scope, roles, the guiding principles. It names governance groups that are responsible for setting the tone, etc. Um, and they will, typically have something with definition. So when we say, you know, data governance, this is what we mean by that. When we say responsible for this, this is what we mean by that. Once that policy is established, then it gets broken down into standards. So these are more granular, and typically they can be changed more easily without having to engage data trustees at their high level. And so this is where we say, okay, the policy says this. What do we want below that? So, you know, we could define how data should be collected, stored, structured, exchanged. It's all these rules that helps others articulate what our expectations are in documentation, in um, you know data storage, in whatever. And so that is a mid-level, and that's typically data trustees. And then the final one is procedures. And these are very, very, these are workflow processes. This is what we do in different cases. So, how do we log our data issues? Um, who owns the website that you can post your data issue to, those kinds of things, very, very, and how do you do it? So these are very nuanced procedures, and typically they could change much more frequently. Um, and they're, sometimes they're aspirational. It's like, we agree that we need a system to do this. We just, we haven't done it yet. And so they will also drive different initiatives as the data governance program expands. So I thought I'd switch over and really talk about some of the documentation. Um, so there's these two terms. There's data dictionary, which kind of is on the left, and it should help to sort of clarify the purpose and use of a data dictionary. So when we're trying to track down the data that's in a source system, for example, or even in a warehouse, we need to know what if it's structured data, what each column in the table means. And so we would document in the data dictionary kind of the data type. Is it a date field? Is it a unit that we need to understand? That kind of thing. And in some cases, we're able to sort of say this can be one of three values. So if you're querying it, like, I need to put this value into my query. They can also have entity relationship diagrams, which are basically maps that show how different tables connect, so that you can follow the map if you want to combine different tables for analysis. And there's tons of tools that do this. The next piece is really a business glossary. And sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. But I think that the sense of the business glossary is that instead of explaining it for people who are maybe BI developers, et cetera, we're talking, the audience is people who are in the business who need to understand what they're looking at in a report, and how the data are calculated and what it means. And so their business glossary is really around creating data literacy among folks across the organization that need to understand these things, so that they can take appropriate action. And sometimes there's there are whole classes on different aspects of the warehouse and its structures, et cetera, that need to be created when there's a data product, like a report or an analysis together, so that people know exactly where the numbers, kind of how they're calculated, et cetera. So that is that, and we'll move on. So while we're on the subject of data definitions, you probably know if you've encountered a bad data definition, but they really, really need to be all of the things that are noted. And this is from George Washington University's BI site, and it's a very good one. Concise, precise, unencumbered. Does it talk about, dependency on other things? It's not circular, and it is distinct. So if somebody's looking at the data definitions for the entire organization, there better not be any duplicates, because it needs to be more nuanced than that. And so really pulling that into the production of your data products, your reports, et cetera, is extremely important. So let's try an example, right? So we've got customer value. And let's say some well-meaning person said, well, it's the value of the customer. That is circular. You can't say the value of the customer is the value. It's not particularly distinct. It's very ambiguous and hard to understand what value means. Is it a points, stars, monetary loyalty, whatever it might be. It's not specific, so you can't really tell, like, what does it mean? How does it calculate it? I mean, does it live in a system, or is this something that we've pulled together from a bunch of other data fields? It's not very specific as to the value calculation or measurement. Is it exact US dollars? What, what is that? Um, it doesn't specify if it's a one-time thing or it gets recalculated nightly, those kinds of things. And it doesn't really tell you much about how it's calculated, right? There's no business context for how it's collected or why it's used. So units, is it dollars? Is it stars? It doesn't really talk about where the data come from to feed this calculation. And then it's vague on customer value, like which customers? An individual? Is it a household? Is it a business entity? How would we do that? So here's the proposed one. So let's call it customer lifetime value. And that definition is the predicted net profit attributed to the entire future relationship with a customer, calculated as the sum of all past and predicted future purchases. Well, now we're talking here. Future net product with, it's calculated with minuses, etc. It's expressed in US dollars and updated monthly based on transaction data. This improved definition, I think, really helps address the ambiguities and the rest of it. And so as we're thinking about our data definitions, let's keep these rules in mind as we go, always thinking about the ultimate end user. And let's forego weird acronyms for one thing, when we're setting this up. So speaking of data definitions, if we look above that, what what happens in many organizations, and I've worked in them over time, is that maybe have specialized report team and they're using tool number one, and there's another report team in a different, maybe it's in marketing, and they're using report tool number two. And you really don't want people to have to know, oh, well, I get that report in this particular login and URL, and I go over here. So one of the things that a lot of tools are now offering, and it's a great idea, is a tool agnostic. So it could have been written in any different, it was Tableau, it was, Azure, it was this, it would BI reports. And so how do you consolidate it and make it easy to search for a general user who's not quite sure what they're looking for? And then how do you continue to keep them engaged so they know when new reports are coming in, etc.? So this is just a picture of one that we built from scratch at my last job. But I mean, I think it shows the flavor of the kinds of things you would want in a data catalog, right? It's got a way to navigate down to type. So maybe I want a visualization. Maybe I want the ability to export a bunch of data so that I can use it locally. What data domain is it? So maybe there's, what steward would I be going to, for example, to get access to this report if it were restricted? You know, what restriction status is it? And then really, does it have a unique name? And is there a description of what's in the report and what you do with it? And it can be, sometimes people just put links to longer definitions that might be out in a wiki somewhere, but it just needs a thumbnail and maybe a little picture of what the report outlook looks like, so that people can choose whether or not it's worth them pursuing access to it if it's restricted. So this is the part of the presentation where I tell you about the buzzwords. And I have to say, sometimes I get foggy on them. But I thought it would be useful for you to, because you see them a lot in literature and on the web, etc. And it might be helpful to demystify them a little bit. So let's start on the left side with data mesh and data fabric. And these are really terms that or terms of art, right? The data mesh is really how effective are we at making use of shared uh, integrations. You know, do we have a way of searching for different integrations we want and deciding to use those to pull data into uh, a new application, for example? A data fabric is much more kind of um, this concept that data are connected wherever they are. So it kind of creates this unified integrated layer for data management. It can sometimes be very technology centric, so it's going to focus on a a technical infrastructure. Let's say it's around data integrations, et cetera. Um, and it's knitting the data together across the institution or across the organization. Um, and obviously, data fabric can be implemented. There's different tools that do it. So let's move on to the other ones up here with the data warehouse. So data warehouse is something that, like, what I was getting my creds on the street doing queries, the data warehouse is where we put everything, because you really couldn't query effectively and aggregate data, et cetera, in a large scale enterprise resource planning system like an HR or financial system. It degraded the performance, and so many folks decided to sort of create a separate place outside of the source system that would be constructed only for reporting, and maybe it got refreshed once a day, and it was all structured data, so it would be typically around the HR, finance, CRM, et cetera, data. And that still exists today. But I think with the explosion in cloud storage, um, things have shifted a bit. And so what happened was, if you sort of got a bunch of data and threw it over into your Amazon Web Services account, it could be stored there. And it's great because you can use like unstructured and structured data. And it's just a big hodgepodge. And so I think what they found over time was that you needed an organizing influence on the data lake itself. How do we find the data sets that are there? How do we categorize them? How are they linked to things that are report outputs, et cetera? And it's inclusive of all the different types of data, both structured and unstructured. And so in the data lake house, you see there's sort of a metadata governance layer that helps visualize data in different types of security views, for example. And all of the data science and the machine learning can be conducted within this organization. So like something like a Snowflake would qualify there. The last one I want to talk about is dark data. And I always think of that as like the Darth Vader of data, where it's not, we've collected this information. Maybe it's legacy data, maybe it's something that we were doing for a project at one point. And this gets to the data architecture and the mapping and where everything is. We need to be able to destroy data or realize that it's kind of musty and it smells like mothballs and we don't really need it anymore. And how do we get rid of it? Sometimes, because especially in legacy systems, et cetera, maybe they use the unique identifier of social security number, and we don't want that hanging around. And so we remove that. Now, I made up my own term, and it's called the data doghouse. This is where you end up with poor data quality, and you're just constantly kind of second guessing what your results are. So these are typical data governance tools and what they do. And, this is non-exclusive list. There are many, many tools out there, and it's important to sort of look at the scale of them and what you're looking for, um, to, to really select the right one at the right time, because there's some that are very helpful when you're in the beginning stages. And then as you advance, you're going to want to upgrade into something with a little bit more functionality. The first one is report catalog, and we talked about this. You could build it yourself, but they do sell them as part of some of these data packages. And just as long as you have one, especially if it comes along with some other package deal that you have for software, you definitely want to use it, and you want to not use it in a siloed way, but in an expansive, organizational wide way. This other piece is really data governance, workflows, and approvals. Now, what is that about? Well, it's really the engine that catches when people request access to a particular report, that is, that they need higher level approval for. And what this does is simply capture their request, route it to the appropriate data steward, get the approval or have the conversation about the use case, et cetera, and be either approved or sent back. And so that there's a whole bunch of software that does that. And the other thing that you can get is data quality issue resolution workflow. And what does that mean? It means that when we identify problems in the data that we want to have explored and possibly corrected, is you want a way to track that. And the reason why I'm talking that is because there's sometimes when a data steward is not kind of on the ball with their custodian, and they don't have the cycles to be able to correct the data, et cetera. And you want to be able to continuously express the fact that there are data quality issues to the folks that are using the outputs, and make sure they know as well. So it's just a tool for sort of looking at things and making sure that the data is of high quality. Sometimes there's some AI kind of logic built in that looks at it and goes, is this right? The next piece is data models and technical metadata. So this is sort of what we were talking about in terms of, we've taken the raw data and we've transformed it into something that's sort of optimized for business users to query. And do they know what's in each column? Do they know how different things are calculated and how to add, group, sum, whatever the values are in the table? And then this kind of map of the entity relationship diagram so that they know which tables to combine and not to combine and how to combine them when they're querying. Data lineage is my favorite. And it's sort of goofy because what I have always wanted, especially because I ended up like running the help desk at certain points, is that people would call up and say, this number doesn't make sense. Where did it come from? And you would have to go and check sort of documentation and check the source system and make sure there wasn't a problem there, and it took a long time. Well, data lineage actually you can be in a report, click on it, and it will show you the path all the way back to where the data were created or modified. And then you can tell, exactly, you can target exactly where you want to fix things, and that's really great. And then finally, metadata and master data management. And this becomes more and more important with the proliferation of systems and the need to kind of, especially if you're a large organization with lots and lots and lots of data, um, it, it, it allows you to kind of run these processes that look and see whether or not you've got duplicate copies of a human being, and maybe they have a different role here and a different role here, but you can pull that together and get the golden record. And the golden record is important because otherwise, if you don't have it, you can't really aggregate data according to or draw any conclusions from data that contains actions or the history of something someone does. So these are really important tools, and you know, they're coming along every day. They get better and better. So this is the last slide. It's really about where you can go for more information. I encourage you to check these out. Data governance, there's actually something called the Data Management Book of Knowledge, which is um, quite similar to other books of knowledge, like I was a project manager, so it's like the PMBOK, right? Um, and it can really help you sort of establish how you kind of get a roadmap together to implement your data governance program, if that's what you're doing, or to improve it. Gartner is sort of a think tank, and they have a lot of free uh, webinars and things like that that you can listen to. That's where I got a lot of this stuff about the data management industry buzzwords, et cetera. They can help to demystify them. And then finally, the Data Warehousing Institute, and they also have free webinars. And so, if you want to learn more about any of the things that I talked about today, these are three great sources. So this is no longer a live session, but you are more than welcome to contact me at Whimsy at Work, or you can give me feedback or review the course at these links. You can always reach me at whimsyatwork.com. And this is my dog, Dickens, and he says, "Thank you for listening." Bye-bye.